Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
So this is part 2 of our book of Robby Marx, Book of Enoch, part 2. And we have Nick on today, and of course, returning philosopher, writer, perennial author, every artist, podcasting genius, everything, Robby Marx. So Robby and Nick, please intro yourself, and yeah, we'll get going.
All right. Hey everybody, my name's Robby Marx, or R Marx is my artist handle. Basically I do art and I research a lot of various information. While I'm doing the art, I listen to books, and then outside of that I kind of read a lot. But if you want to check out all my stuff, you can go to my Linktree, which is just RMARX at Linktree, and that'll pull up everything I got. So,
Awesome, Nick, go for it.
All right, yeah, Nick from the Occult Rejects. It's on all major podcasts, BitChute, Rumble, and YouTube. And again, just even Robby and Jin are part of the Occult Rejects. So if you haven't heard them on that show, I highly suggest to go check it out. Have some awesome work from both of them, and I'm very happy to be here and that you allowed me to join you. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Always love story time with Robby.
I mean, that's part of the whole thing of why it's like, as I told you last night, Nick, is part of the reason I started my podcast was partly to go on your show, and also partly so I could host Robby for this purpose.
You the whole series just with Robby.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, all this information, getting into all these different subjects, it's really just so expansive that I don't believe a person within their lifetime could conceptually be able to, dig into the depths of all this information,
No, you're totally right, Robby. I think that the interesting thing is that you see where I'm using they in the nebulous, I guess, terms. I'm not referring to anyone in particular, but I think that you see that there's been attempts at different times to synthesize a perennial philosophy or a perennial system, like very Evola, right? But then you can also see that those, and not just Evola, but maybe like Theosophy and
Huxley.
Different things. Yeah, Huxley. They always try and make it into one sort of overarching singular institution, but there's a flaw in that because not everything works together. It has to actually fit together. You can't slot it in.
Yeah. Well, and that's specifically when you're looking at the books of Enoch, in the second book of Enoch, it's basically a narrative about Enoch getting taken up into the heavens and seeing where the Gregoria are, seeing these different angels and coming face to face with God himself. But the thing is, it's set in sevens, because the entire book of Enoch is based around sevens, right? So you have 7 heavens, and later on it's believed that the 8th, 9th, and 10th heaven were actually added into the book to make it coordinate and become fit in line with Kabbalah and the Tree of Life as far as the 10 Sephiroth. So this is, coming from before, these ideas coming essentially before Judaism, before the evolution of Kabbalah. It's a 7-based system, and the Enochian calendar is 7,000 years long. And then you go, 1,000 years later, and the Judaic calendar is, 6,000 years long. So you kind of see how these things move and develop, and how they try to, like you're saying, shoehorn them all into a perennial singular concept.
So I think this is really interesting what you said. 2 things really, but the idea of the sort of 7 densities or the 7 layers. This is, so if you look at the Zohar, like the Sefer Yetzirah,
right,
that idea is more in that original conception. Like that's the idea is 7. It's 7 layers of the universe, and then 7 is the number of finality. Right. Like you come back to Netzach, come back into form, come back to the garden.
Right. That's the ultimate lowest point of the dip before you start to, return back. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I think they even compared, if I'm remembering correctly, they compare it to Job. And so the story in Job is that he has this 7 great, or sort of like an idea of 7 great misfortunes, but then he prospers over 7 times more.
Right. And gains 7. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So
and that's a whole 777 philosophy as well in Job, which is the earliest part of the Bible.
Yes. That's what's really interesting, is that you do have these very profound, like much broader than just the story even of Job. But of course, even the story itself is quite metaphysically important, and I think theologically important, but it's right there. So people could, just like read a Bible, and it's like there's a very magical, very secret kind of understanding right there.
And with the Bible, you have your exoteric and your esoteric. You have your outer story, and then you have the learning and the wisdom that's encompassed within the form of parable.
I have a question for both of you, if you mind me asking, only because it was something that came up recently that I heard. And, we're talking about Judaism and I guess the Bible now.
Well,
yeah. Were people speaking Hebrew when the Bible was made?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You go back into the stories of the Tower of Babel and getting into Nimrod and the architect there. It was basically said that when they divided the languages, that that he specifically was able to keep the original language, which was which was the Hebrew language, which kind of implies that it came from before the flood. So this may be the language that was spoken by Noah in regard to the whole when you get up into the idea of the world being flooded and Noah carrying that seed into the new world.
Do you think that Kabbalah existed at the same time the Bible came out?
Yeah, there is some talk of these Dadocs, these children of Noah that basically were roaming around the Dead Sea, meditating in caves. And it said, in a couple places it said, and they were teaching Kabbalah. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about how far back Kabbalah actually. And if you look at the fact that it is in accordance with the planetary bodies, and going back to Atlantis with the 7 rings, and each ring having essentially a planetary temple on each ring, that there's always been the worship of the planets and the movable stars. So as far as the zodiac, and you get into all the original creation tales of, Thoth creating the zodiac and going, just
Mhm.
it's prolific, just part of the whole.
The reason I ask is like I was actually questioning myself, and I was like, maybe I don't know, but like I've seen like this, I guess this idea of thought getting promoted that Hebrew didn't exist when the Bible was written.
Hmm.
So I was like, if people were practicing Kabbalah, I said, prior to the Bible, what language were they using when they referred back to it? They stopped using
Right.
Hebrew. It's like I just didn't understand that. I thought maybe I was wrong, but
Yeah, and I don't know how far back Hebrew actually goes. I would say it's one of the things that morphed kind of into existence when you compare it to the different alphabetic charts of the Phoenicians and all the various. But at the same time, there's been stories through the course of these texts that say Moses basically presented the Hebrew language, and then like I was saying, that Tower of Babel story that talks about the original language being Hebrew. Yeah, it's hard to say, but there has been lots of attempts to basically say that it's been around, going back pre-Diluvian.
no, that's what I thought. I was like, I think this is just another ignorant shillman
Mm.
thing. They're fucking
Yeah,
morons going on talking about that now, and I'm like, I don't think that
yeah,
makes any sense, bro. I hate to say it.
yeah. But you definitely do have to wonder,
Some ignorance lately, huh? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So, well, let's get into the Book of Enoch. How about that?
Let's get into it.
So, now the Book of Enoch was an apocalyptic, pseudopolygraphic literature. It's not regarded as scripture by the Jews or the Christians. It essentially came to being in the 1st century AD. It's a Slavonic text, but in 2009, there were fragments of it found in Coptic, which is the more modern Egyptian text. It's distinct from Enoch 1, and it's unrelated to Enoch 3. So, covering all three of these books kind of gives you different flavors of what these different cultures were kind of thinking in regard to this idea of this character Enoch. You know what I mean?
So, Robbie, in this one, does then Enoch, so you're saying it's distinct from book
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
So does he carry on the same, is he the same archetype is what I'm trying to ask you? Is he like, does he
Yes.
carry on this? Yeah. Okay. Like a
Yeah.
lineage figure, a magician figure.
Basically, this character that, has this encounter, you see this symbolic night journey, Enoch has the night journey, Muhammad has the night journey, Jacob, when he has the pillow, when he has the dream, he has the night journey. This is a very common theme that we see, and Enoch may have been the first night journey.
do you think it's like part of the hero's journey in a sense too?
Within the ideas of the Monomyth and Joseph Campbell, to some extent, yeah, because and it's just like Bilbo Baggins. He goes out the door, he has this grand adventure, and then he comes back and brings wisdom to his people. So that's essentially very much the idea of what happens here with Enoch.
Yeah, I just thought like maybe what was going on was like kind of a slice of the whole hero's. You know what I'm saying? The leaving in the
Journey. Oh yeah, yeah. And and then within the hero's journey, you end up getting up to the labors of Hercules, where they had to perform these tasks, and the intricacies of the stories seem to become higher and higher, and interrelated between, again, back to trying to relate this stuff to some sort of perennialism.
I do think there's something interesting with what Nick said about so this is something I found, Nick, and Robbie as well, is that it's hard to trace the magician or that specific archetypal character
Mm-hmm.
in the Joseph Campbell's like monomyth, like he created basically like a Sephira. I mean, it's a
Right.
sphere where he's demarcated it into 5 or 4 quadrants, and then each quadrant has 5 to 7
Characteristics.
characteristics, and then you sort of can trace out, okay, is this a hero that fits within that? It's actually quite hard to trace that kind of like Gandalf, I guess you could say, figure through that story. There is a way to do it, but it's not you have to add in all these other sort of like what later authors kind of added to his own I guess formulation. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's often, I think of it as like there's so many deities that are heroes, right? Like there's this like the king of heaven archetype. He is the quintessential hero. But then you have this other Promethean, Robbie and I talked about this in the first one, like this Enoch is like a Promethean figure where he's kind of bringing knowledge, bringing wisdom, bringing understanding of the text to people through his own experience. So there's something mirrored in him, but he's almost an anti-hero in a way too.
Right. It definitely is interesting looking at all those aspects and how they but that figure of the magician is always the amorphous figure that kind of is the outsider, that is the one peering in and observing the hero system almost. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly. That's really well said, Robbie. I totally agree with that.
So now this is generally considered as a medieval manuscript. Scholars indicate that there are temple practices within it. So this is seen as a second temple text. And basically they call the temple Ahuzan, which is a cryptic name from Jewish literature for the second temple. So, but it's interesting. This is a Slavonic text, so this is in the Slavian regions that this comes from. So now we have the night journey, right? And Enoch tells his children not to seek for him, and it has, these different angel descriptions, and they're like fiery burning eyes, and like their skin is like the embers of coal, and they're like emitting like glorious light that's like blinding, and like this just has some of the greatest imagery. If people want to seek this out and read it, I would highly encourage it, just because it has some really beautiful kind of ideas within it. So what ends up happening is this angel comes down and he takes Enoch up into the heavens, and in the second heaven they run into the apostates that are like waiting, kind of like, this is almost like a limbo kind of region where there's just all these souls that are kind of, they weren't really good people and they're just kind of in waiting, like this kind of Sheol kind of idea, and then he's taken up to the third heaven, which is essentially, I believe, the Garden of Eden, because there is the presence of the tree of life. There's this fragrance that's in the air that he talks about, and he says that the tree of life is like fire-like, and it's like made out of living flames, and just like, and how they're projecting up into the sky and down into the earth. And it almost reminded me of like an electric, like torrid field that encompasses and creates kind of like what life is, but it says that it produced all fruit, and that from its roots sprang forth honey and milk. And going back into the Saturnian age of milk and honey, and the ideas of just the pure, like, open cleanliness of nature taking care of everything. But there were 300 angels basically to keep this garden, and they were very bright, and they were all like singing. There's a lot of talk of like vibration, like you know, everywhere you go there's these different entities that are like singing and praising, and the idea of this, you know, saying holy, holy, holy of this. And it's just, you know, when you get and back to the Lord of the Rings, the the idea of the ring itself, you know, is it just the ring that's on the finger, or is it the intrinsic sound, the ring, the tone that emanates and vibrates through all of creation, right? And then you get into, if you go back to Tolkien's Submarinian, he talks about that in the beginning of creation, all of the angels were singing in perfect harmony with one another, and they were all like, you know, basically this ring or this tone that was sending out and being creation. And there was, and he talks about there was one specific angel that thought it was so beautiful, everything that he was that he saw that was happening, that he started to sing a different song to praise how beautiful all of creation was. And this was essentially the idea of, you know, Lucifer, or the rise of that original creation. So even Tolkien, you know, has this idea of this intrinsic ringing or this vibration that is, you know, creating, you know.
You know, it's really weird when you were explaining this. And, you know, I've talked about it recently. I don't know if I even said it on Jin's show, but like when I talk about like that experience I had with the eclipse, when I talk about like the colors starting to spin out, like my visual, like it is almost like something that looks like spirals emanating off of like the eclipse. And like around that time is when I go deaf.
Mm,
And it's like it's just more visual instead of actually hearing anything. But
right.
it looks like a pulsating, vibrating rings coming off of like the
Yeah.
coming down at me. And just like the way you're explaining that right now, I was like, fuck this, like just kept making me think about that.
Nice.
It's really weird. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so now this
Let me
this
interrupt you. Sorry, Robbie.
Yeah, go
Let
ahead, Jim.
me reframe my original question that I forgot. But so there was this. This is an interesting point, and I'm sure both of you know this. But the this was a problem amongst the early Hebrews or the early Jews, is that they would often create metallic statues for the worship of the host. I think I've even heard you discuss this, Robbie. And the prohibition against graven images really comes from the worship of the planetary host, and they would make the statues in the planetary metals. So, but the reality is like, you can see, like, when it occurs in the Bible, and it occurs several times, the prophet of that time will say, no, you should not do this. This is not the way. And so you can see that sometimes people's perception of what early Judaism is it's infused with these ideas that are misunderstood, and then later that gets extended to Catholicism, where they see Catholics using statues, but they don't quite understand what the actual original rabbinical prohibition was about. And so, but I'm not saying that Catholics perfectly adhere to that Old Testament, thinking, but I think it's interesting. And then you said something else that several things, but the tree of life produces all fruits. So what if you could consider the fruits almost as I often say, seeds are just the words. So the fruits themselves must also be language. They must be like the languages. But at that time, language was unified until, as you related, there's one angel who sings in the discoherence or the decoherence with all the others. Interestingly, to bring up something that Nick and I discussed on his episode, pink is the color of decoherence. But pink has a special property in that, although it is decoherent with the other sounds or colors that are occurring at the same time, there's a creative property there. It's not like purple. It takes on it's a higher principle, we'll say.
Well, when you look at vibratory color itself, every color has a frequency, and red is the most violent frequency. But then if you take that and you mix that agitated waveform, and you mix it with white, which is representative of light, then it kind of it raises it on a certain level. You know what I mean? Yeah, pink is an interest, and those into the purples and the
Mhm.
yeah, very interesting how the waveforms even work in themselves.
Oh, yeah.
This might, yeah. Sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing. You said, yeah, definitely. With the
Yeah,
colors, different frequencies.
yeah. So now, this what was it? The third heaven, right? Being essentially the garden where the tree is at. It is prepared for the righteous. It is like the inheritance of everyone who seeks higher, consciousness and ways on the earthly plane, away from matter. But Enoch ends up getting taken up to the northern side of this third heaven, which is Eden, right? And on the north side of this heaven, there's a fiery river of frost, right? And there is torturing going on without mercy. And they talk about this is where the people who sodomize children and practice black magic, fornication and murder, who injure the poor just to gain wealth. Basically, they bow down to unclean gods, and this is where they're put. Like I said, what was it? Torturing without mercy in this fiery river of frost. So I thought that was interesting that this was kind
Pretty
of
sick.
yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting, particularly, was the idea of it's like a northern quadrant. So this is
Right.
something from Tantra that you often see if you look at when I post like mandalas, and that's really it's a cosmological map of the universe.
Mhm.
So interestingly, different tantras actually have different conceptual models of the universe. So even if you practice two different texts, they might actually have a different model of the universe in each one. So you have to kind of switch over for when you're doing the other one. So there's one idea that Venus or is the northern quadrant, is the planet of the northern quadrant. But then there's also an idea that Saturn is the is the planet of the northern quadrant. So it depends on sort of your framework, but it's really interesting because Venus has this particular association with ice. It also has a particular association with, it's not inherently transgressive as such, but it rotates counterclockwise. So if you move in that transgressive way or a transgressive swastika, which would be the counterclockwise motion of that, then
And
you're
that
able to manipulate material goods. Like you're able to pull material benefit from the milk ocean.
right.
That's kind of, or the ocean of honey.
And that's the feminine swastika, correct?
Yes.
And then when it spins the clockwise, it would become the masculine swastika.
Well, it depends because we try and say that you should let the wheel be free, like non-dual, completely non-dual, spinning any
Right.
direction that the natural inclination. But the way you want the energy, kind of, if you want to think of it as like biological model, you want the energy to spin clockwise. But sometimes you have things that you need to break up, maybe energetic bodies or negative obstacles in your life. So you have to destroy that. So it's not inherently negative. It's just that you have to move the wheel in a specific way in order to break up the aggregation, and then you can like purify it from there.
Nice. And okay, so then Enoch is taken to the fourth heaven, and there are 4,000 stars on one side and 4,000 stars on the other side. And these are basically represented as phoenixes and chiacrides with 12 wings. And these are, if you look into what these chiacrides are, they're related to the serpent or the seraphim. And basically, and seraph itself means to burn. So, these burning stars are seen as, and there you get the constant interrelationship between the stars and the different angels. So basically, you have the Ophanim, the Seraphim, the Cherubim, the various classes of angels that are kind of pointed out. And then they show Enoch the gates of the sun being 6 gates placed within the 4 seasons. The western parts of the solar calendar are guarded by 400 angels. And these phoenixes and Chiakrates, they basically spark into song when Enoch enters into the 4th heaven, right? And they get into the gates of the moon, 30 to 31 days, 365-day calendar beginning in March, a 28-year solar cycle. They get into the great cycle of 532 years. And this is basically the calendar that Orthodox Christianity ended up using to come up with the date for the creation of Adam, which is said to be March 1st, 5508 BC was when Adam was basically created. So, and that kind of plays into the whole idea of the 6,000-year calendar of Judaism as well, And again, back to the Enochian calendar being 7,000 years and the Hebrew calendar being 6,000 years.
So just a quick note on that. I think it's really interesting because this idea has come up a lot in terms of like the stuff that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is like this idea of the 60 versus 70-year calendar, because there is a Sri Vidya Tantra that shows a 70-year calendar. However, their lunar cycle is very similar to what we use in Buddhism in the Kala Chakra Tantra. So these are both very high level, very secret, not secret, but generally quite well guarded texts. So it's interesting that they have a difference like that. 10 years makes a lot of difference when you're doing like long calculations for the whole yuga or the whole aeon. But then the lunar calendar actually correlates better, like you're saying, like gates of the moon, and then there's a way to understand it where they're actually converging on a point, even though their solar cycle might be different.
Right.
So the lunar calendar seems to have this secret knowledge that that we kind of have forgotten a little bit in the West, or that people have like not paid attention to.
And in Egyptian, the dark side of the moon is the secrets of Thoth, because he was the secretary of the moon that basically, hid in the shadows. He was the secret wisdom of the lunar knowledge. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Robbie, because I don't know, like, when it comes to ceremonial magic, it was always known that like Thoth is associated with the moon, but not too many people seem to like acknowledge that. I don't. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, but for me, it makes a whole lot of sense because even though Thoth fits on number 8, I actually think the hero's journey, in my sense, in a way, really starts at 9, which would be the moon tree. I think once you leave out, you're already on your journey. So for me, I think it makes like even like a Kaf Nakansu is even like there. A lot of people tend to think that the moon is always female deities, but there is actually male deities that are associated with the moon. I think I think in some sense, us not looking at that kind of maybe leaves out a lot to understand when it comes to that idea. So I'm glad you're bringing up a male deity, really, for
well, and in the Bible, when they say "go and sin no more," right? Sin was actually a moon god in one of the neighboring countries, and he was a male personification of the moon. So yeah, and I believe the Japanese as well see the moon as a male personification. So
I want to mention about Sin. I'm so glad you brought this up, Robbie and Nick, is that Sin is such an interesting deity because he wears the crescent moon, like Robbie's saying, on his head. So it's very Thoth-like in many ways.
He's definitely related to Thoth, yeah.
And a lot of the Indian and Iranian scholars have actually said that he's very Shiva-like Shiva has an or not, it's not an avatar, but it's like a form where he is a little boy riding a black dog.
Yeah, that black dog. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And so
Interesting.
that's where he would kind of be. He's not at the moon. He's more of like the eclipse, but he's not phenomenologically the eclipse, but he walks on the paths. That's how it's described, is he walks on the paths upwards. So he's leading you to knowledge, but he's not saying anything. You're supposed to just follow his example. So I think, but he's also related to sin, and I just think that's so interesting in the king who rebuilt the temple, or not the temple, but the ziggurat of Ziggurat of Ur. He was also a follower of that deity of sin. So we don't really know what came before sin, is sort of what I think. We don't really know like the original practice of the Sumerians. Like it's kind of mystified, lost in time. All we know is what this one king who saw this ancient ruin remade, but he was of his own religion, right?
And
so he was
that remaking of that ziggurat was basically the knowledge that was gained from the pillars from before the deluge, where they got the information on architecture and the 7 sacred sciences, and basically brought that and rebuilt Babylon and brought worship of the gods back into a time again.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think it's really interesting because you have to sort of look at the calendar as something I've been thinking about, is that you look at the planets and the calendar system as not fixed. Like they have to be flexible to match your yuga. It can't just be this knowledge that transcends time. It actually has to make sense to your civilization.
Yeah, for sure. So next, Enoch, he is taken into the 5th heaven. And this is where he encounters the fallen angels, essentially the Greek Gregory. And they're basically sitting in silence with withered faces. And this is where we get the Hebrew Miriam, which is equivalent to the Watchers. And they are the ones who corrupted the humans and will be punished on God's great day.
Well, it's interesting because the 5th Sephirah is obviously Gevurah. That's where the entrance to Samael would be, like where his gate would be, if you're looking at the Klepoth. And so, or Azazel, there's some authors who say one or the other, but sometimes they say that's the same angel. So right, it depends on the text. I think we even mentioned this in the first one, but that's interesting because that is also where that like left-handed angel of God appears also on the Kabbalistic tree, that 5th density.
So next he goes to the 6th heaven with 7 bands of angels brighter than the sun. And they measure all life on heaven and earth and write down all souls of men. And here in the 6th heaven, there are 6 phoenixes, 6 cherubim, and 6 winged ones that sing undescribably beautiful songs that basically resonate through all of the 6th heaven.
I mean, that again totally makes sense. Tippereth 666 solar. Yeah, right. I mean, it's all there. The Phoenix, although you can make an interesting argument that the Phoenix is really on a path. It's really on a path between like Gevurah and
of ascending.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than being fixed. But yes, absolutely, it's there. The idea of the songs and the singing, like this is also a tantric idea. Like there's a sound that happens at Yesod, or what we would call Yesod, and it's like, but it's more of a vibration, maybe more of a drum beat.
Right.
And then when you are at the sun, yes, it's full music and a full grammar and a full composition. But in any composition, there is sort of a magical element because it's constructed like a language. So it can be illusory, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So next, he's taken to the 7th heaven. And there are fiery troops of archangels, corporeal forces and dominions, cherubim and seraphim, thrones, and the many-eyed ones. Enoch, at this point, he becomes afraid and begins trembling, and he is told, "Do not fear." So as he's ascending higher and higher into the resonant, forms, it's starting to, shake the vibrations of what reality is. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like, I do use that a lot now when, like, when I just feel like my experience sometimes, like, there's certain times where it was like a little fearful, but if you kind of let it go and just experience it, things happen. But I don't know. There's a lot of things that you say just remind me of my experience of pieces and shit. It's just very weird.
Yeah. So now the 10th heaven, right? Enoch is in the 7th heaven, right? With all these energetic forces around him. And the description of some of them, like I said, they're like translucent fire and frost, and their eyes are glowing, and they're like, their heads are on fire. Reminds me kind of like John Dee's and what was his name, the magician, when they came up with the Enochian language. Edward Kelly, when you go into the descriptions of all these different Enochian energies that are within John Dee and Kelly's work, I think they directly pulled a lot of this stuff from these old texts. You know what I'm saying? So, but now in the 7th heaven, Enoch, he can see the 10th heaven, right? And so he can see God. Basically, they call him Ararat, in the Hebrew tongue. And that Aravat, it basically means holy, holy, holy. So all these entities are just singing, chanting in procession, hypnotically, holy, holy, like, and resonating, and basically in some sense, maybe holding all of time space together.
I just want to jump in here, Robbie. That's really fascinating. I found, as Nick mentioned, I found your description of the 7th heaven, which would be Netzach, very interesting, because in Jyotisha, it's described as a diamond, but in Kabbalah, it's also described as like a block of ice, right? Like it can be either or. And that also makes sense. Like it's really the same thing. It's a translucent kind of idea, but very dense, hard.
Yes.
And so it's the light, it's like golden light literally passing through the faceted cut diamond. So you can see God beyond the material form, but you don't have direct access to him. It's not like you can reach out and touch him. You're still there. You're still down in the lower world.
Well, you're still caught in the crystallization function of matter coming into, like you're in that procedural form of matter crystallizing.
Yes, very well said. Thank you.
Yeah. So and it says heavenly soldiers stood in order on 10 steps, each bowing down in rank. And it said this, I found this in an interesting concept, but there were strong and fierce soldiers singing with soft and gentle voices. It's just the
because Mars loves Venus.
Yeah.
Because Gevurah loves Netzach. It would be that, like the soldiers, that's the clear Gevurah archetype. They're like in iron armor, right? But they're like kneeling before what is the more resplendent light.
Right.
And the many faceted eyes, like the angels of those, like that class.
Yeah, the many-eyed ones.
Yes, the mixed. Yes, thank you, Robbie.
Yes. So now the guides that Enoch has had to this point, they leave him, right? And he becomes very afraid and basically falls down on his face. And then Gabriel comes and gives him advice. He's guided by Gabriel, and Gabriel proceeds to pick Enoch up from the 7th heaven and takes him directly to the 10th heaven, right? and he takes him to the Lord's face and places him directly in front of the face of God himself in its effervescent, like shining and burning form. It's just a great story. But it says his face like iron made to glow in fire, emitting sparks, and it burned marvelous and very amazing, undescribable, and very, very, very terrible.
I wonder if they're referring there to sky iron or meteorite, because that is very common in the Himalayan texts when they, especially to refer to the highest kind of form, or the highest, theurgic force, is that it would at least produce adamantine or meteorite. So yeah, that's really interesting. And then I also want to say this last thing is that when you're saying the 10th heaven, that is so interesting, because both Malkuth and Kether could be considered 10. Because what is 0 but a placeholder?
Right.
Or but a breath?
Right. And again, I'm going to go back to, there are beliefs that the 8th, the 9th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th heavens were added in after the fact on this text. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of, see some intercession in regard to the future playing with the past.
Yeah, that is interesting too. So if the Orthodox Church accepts it as it is written, I guess, so they're accepting that there are the 10 layers of reality.
Right.
But yeah, we could say, just as a hypothetical, just like armchair magician saying like, okay, it's really 7, and there's a corruption here, or maybe it's like a conceptual layer. Because I think that's how I would prefer to think of it, is like, you could just think of it as like you were saying, Robbie, like the fear. Well, he's coming back down, like Netzach in Tantra, at least the goddess Tantras, there, that's the terminus. So that's where the light sort of comes into fruition, right? If you want to even use that word.
Yeah.
But then what happens? Gabriel comes in from the moon. Gabriel's the angel of the moon. So he comes back from Yesod, where Hod and Netzach are both rectified. It's the light comes from Yesod, but then the light from those two spheres are also rectified there. So it's like a coming together. Gabriel comes in from the moon, draws you in, and where do we really live is in the I guess in the Sefer Yetzirah, we live on the moon, but the Malkuth is really us. So it's taking us like to face what is like our higher, I'll maybe it's a little Jungian, but it's like our higher self, almost like that we see God, but it's like not us, but it's something, a little, it's partly us. It's partly like our understanding of what we're seeing.
Revelation of the self in regard to eternity that we exist within.
Yeah, well said.
So let's see now. So at this point, the archangel Michael comes in and lifts Enoch up. So he's literally face to face, and God basically removes Enoch's earthly garments or his skin, right? And then he's anointed with a sweet ointment that is sweet like dew and very bright. And he puts him in the garments of glory. And it's at this point that later on we see Enoch becomes translated, but he becomes transformed into a glorious one as an angel, right? And at this point, God summons the angel Pravail, who's an archangel that is related to Penemu. A lot of people say, which was basically one of the fallen angels that went and landed on Mount Hermon, right? And he's the one that taught humans how to write, and is basically related to back to Thoth again. But let's see these. And the reason God summoned Pravael was because he is he's quicker in wisdom than all the other angels. And he supplies Enoch with books and writing utensils and gives Enoch to access to the angelic writings of the seraphim that are basically the knowledge of all the workings of the cosmos and the knowledge of the souls and the lives of all the individuals through all of time, right? Basically, all souls prepared for eternity before the form. Okay, so then it gets into the guff, which is interesting. There's this idea of the guff, which, you know, in the last Enoch, we talked about there was the well of the dew and the well of the frost and the well of, you know, these various, the winds and the rains. Well, the guff is basically the well of souls, right? And each soul, it says, is created for a time and a place. When the guff is empty, time will end. And basically, he tells Enoch secrets not even the angels know of their creations and why. So basically, Enoch, he's getting all this sacred information, and, you know, basically writing it down in these books that he's going to end up taking back to his family on Earth.
So there's something really interesting about this, Robbie, when you're saying, I know, because when you were doing your Nimrod series with Nick, I would always think of it when you would mention like the skinlessness. And so a lot of tantric deities are portrayed as being skin or wearing, not necessarily skinless themselves, but they are wearing skins, sometimes of men, sometimes of an elephant, sometimes of something else. But usually those are the two prominent ones, where the elephant would represent like the kind of kingdom of man, the terminus of like where that begins and ends. So like what is beyond the kingdom of man into space. And then the man would represent like his ego or his fear. It can be either one. It depends what deity is wearing the thing, but in particular it's associated with fear and associated with like that fear of moving out of form into formlessness, which is something that I also discussed with Nick. So it's so interesting to hear it sort of come full circle again, because a lot of the higher tantric deities like Hevajra or Chakra Samvara, they have the association with the wheel. I mean, the wheel is sort of there's an implication of wheel turning king in their names. Maybe not for Hevajra, but there's an idea there. And he doesn't have an identity. That's what his name even means. It means he who is who is adamantine and empty. So he who is forged and then also empty, but empty isn't nothingness. It's just, to borrow something Lisa says, it's massless. So yeah, you know, it's like it's luminous as well. Like you were saying, like the shining angels. So there's just an idea that the words themselves, like the actual seeds of the fruits, they have an internal luminosity that doesn't come from the sun, that doesn't come from any other external source, but that's there within them. Right. And even if they're corrupted or what we would call burnt, because the ocean of sugarcane is where the words come from, sweet words at least. And when you use them improperly, they become burnt. So but there's a way to rectify them, and that is through doing either right-handed or left-handed practices. It's actually to refine the physical words, or the words as sounds, and also in the writing. So it's not really for doing magic. That's what a lot of Tantra people, I think, forget, is that it's not about magic. It's about you're supposed to purify the Sanskrit. And I know that the reconstruction of Hebrew was in the early 19th century, was also had this idea in mind. Whether you want to call it a Kabbalistic idea, was to rectify the way the world is through the words, through the actual like syllabary that they use.
And the words that we use create a construct of the reality that we exist in. The words are a very important, essential factor. I mean, and you constantly hear within these ancient texts of, you know, the word made, you know, real or visible. essentially, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let there be light. So
Mhm.
there's this idea of the word being the function. And when you get into physics and start looking at the observer affecting reality, and you were talking about the luminescence, the self-created luminescence of the seed, when the sperm hits the egg, a spark of light is generated. You get into DNA and RNA, and when DNA zips itself up, it actually creates photons of light, that are self-generated within the function of the reproduction of DNA itself. So it's very interesting, this luminous light that is in the seed.
So something. Oh, sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
Lisa had brought that up not too long ago, and I guess she was like, listening to like my story that I was covering, and she says, I find it interesting how, like, when you think about when life is created, there is that flash of light, and she's like,
Yeah.
you're talking about seeing it before you cross the abyss. She's like, I wonder if it's like, it's there at birth and at death or
And at
whatever.
death. Oh
You
yeah.
come in with light and you go out with it.
Out with light. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, very much like when you're born, you get a mass injection of DMT into your system. And then at that moment that you're going out, you also get another mass burst of DMT in your system as you're dying. So there is, the spirit molecule, DMT. It's an interesting, road to go down and look at. But getting back into the book of Enoch, right? I want to read this little part where during this time that Enoch is learning all these secrets of eternity and creation and how the world came into being, right? That he's writing down in these books that he's writing. It said, now this is from the second book. It says, I command in thee a very lowest, that visible physical things should come down from invisible spiritual, and that Adial came down very great, and behold him, and lo, he had a belly of great light. And I said to him, become undone, Adal, and let the visible come out of you. And he came undone, and a great light came out, and I was in the midst of the great light. And as there is born light from light, there came forth a great age, and showed all creation which I had thought to create, and I saw that it was good. So this is God telling Enoch how he created the physical world, right? And when you look into this idea of Adal, Adoil, Adal, it's basically a luminous aeon, primarily an agent of creation and an invisible thing, right? And later on in the text, God says that Adial is above his throne, and nothing is higher than it. It is a mystery, and God orders it ascend higher than his throne. And then within the 25th chapter of the Apocalypse in the Bible, they talk about the final consummation of creation will recall and disintegrate Adal. And it's also been compared to the Gnostic idea of Barbello being the first created emanation of purity that is neither negative or positive, kind of like you were talking about there just a second ago, Jen.
Yeah, so Tantra matches, or at least Buddhist Tantra, maybe not the Indian Tantra, but the Buddhist Tantra matches this idea very well. Of the Barbello, we have the sort of Lilith, Chamunda, Ekajati figure, but in Buddhism, she actually reaches a higher apotheosis. So it's not just her as a low goddess who accepts blood sacrifice. It's like her as the primordial consort. So she is like she's completely liberated from like the old ideas. But my point is that when you read texts that say like recite a little prayer to the primordial existence, it often calls it the Vajra Mu, or like the primordial grandmother. So it's like very Barbello, right? And she is kind of invisible in some ways because she's also one-eyed, but the eye is not of the world, it's her third eye, so it's like her spiritual eye. So that's because she's not, so she doesn't get attached to what she sees in front of her.
Right. Kind of like the eye of providence.
Yes, very similar. And
Yeah,
then something else that you said, Robbie, was you were talking about, like, so this idea of the word as the cause, and I think we talked about this even in a little bit in the first one, is that we were trying to figure out, like, yeah, there's all these different ways of understanding what the cause is. So there's the Gnostic idea that the thought is cause, the epinoia is the cause, or the word as the cause, or the third cause, which is like perception. So, or that can also be the second cause, and then the third cause is really the word. Sorry, but in Tantra, this actually makes a lot of sense. Even to go back to the Barbello example, the first cause is not really a cause. The first cause is destruction. Then the second cause is perception, and then the third cause would be the word. So I think that's really interesting, just for people to kind of formulate, like, around, like, we're talking 7 layers or 10 layers, but then you have these 3 primary causes of formation, or of our creation, or of reality even. But they're also to sort of take place at different, you could say, times. Like from where we learn the word, where we learn where the word means, and what we learn what it can do.
Right. And interestingly, when we look at the Enoch text, it is a tie between the evolution of Western religious philosophy, and it also ties into Eastern religion. So we have a kind of a fulcrum here that kind of precipitates where we can see how this thought inflects in both the East and the West.
So this is something that a lot of my people who I know who are practice Buddhism, Dharma people, they often will. It's like a thought that Eastern Orthodoxy is very similar and has very non-dual elements compared to a lot of the Abrahamic faiths. And I'm not obviously anti-Abrahamic or anti-Christian in particular in any way, but I do think it's interesting that Orthodoxy resolves the kind of what we would see as Buddhists as a paradox of dualism that exists within the Abrahamic faiths, which Kabbalah also resolves in and of itself. Because when you're looking at, like, as you know, Robbie, like Ramak and Lurius, you could say that there's a non-dual element. There's, like, at least some thinking about it, whether it's the full meaning or not. Okay, you can make an argument, but I think there's a seed there.
Yeah, I could see that. Now, so some of the other stuff that they go into, I thought one of the things that they talked about was the idea that lightning was both water and fire, that it was softer than water and firmer than rock, which is an interesting concept. But it said that the troops of angels, right, were made from fire, and they speak as one angel. And they spoke. That's so. Here we get into this idea again of this sort of fallen angel that seeks to set up a system higher than the system itself. So it speaks of this one angel who wished to set up a throne above God, above the clouds. This is very much the same story that we find in Jacob's night journey when he has his dream. And that angel is thrown out, but continues flying above the abyss of the bottomless pit. And then they talk about how man was essentially put together, sets up the sun and constellations, and then filled the Gulf, which is that well of souls, and then creates man on the 6th day. From, again, here we have 7 applications within the Enochian system. The first one, he made his flesh from the earth, his blood from the dew, his eyes from the sun, his bones from stone, his intelligence from the swiftness of the angels in the clouds, his veins from the hair and the grasses of the earth, and his soul from God's breath and the wind. which kind of gets into the Egyptian Papher as far as that believing that energy breathed life into the creation, that was the animating force, essentially, you know.
No, what you said was, I think, very profound, and I think you could actually go through each of the different formulations that you went through and do like Kabbalah with it, like attribute it to each different sephira and also paths around it, which is really interesting because that's a little more complicated and a little harder to do. So, but I think what you said was the most interesting to me was the last one where you said it was air and breath. So the female consort in Tantra is the breath. Like she is the sound. That's the prime. That's like the
explosive.
Yeah, it's the thing that takes action on the world.
Right.
And then the air is also like, it's very 13. Like that's the air. It's the 3 + 1, at least in a tantric idea, because it's the earth, the fire, and the water that has to produce in synthesis air. So the fourth cause.
Right.
But it's also interesting because the air is also the dragon. So there's something Ahrimanic about that, just like there's something Ahrimanic about mankind. But we get to choose, right? It's not fixed. It's not like we have to be like the destructive elements of Ahriman. It just, we get to choose. So I think that's really interesting too. It's like both of those things, very 17. I know Nick likes that number, but it's very the lady and the dragon. Like that's very much what that even sounds like.
Osirian.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. So then it's said that basically Adam is put on earth as Lord of the earth to rule and control it. And then it talks about the devil and the evil spirits of the lower places, and how the devil made himself a fugitive, and his name was Satan, or the Persian Shaitan, the adversary. And he became different from the angels, still knowing the righteous and sinful things, and he knows his sin. And that at that point, it was when he sought to seduce Eve, but he would not touch Adam, because he was the first made by God. And they say that it says that Adam was in paradise only 5.5 years, right? Or 5.5 hours, right? So if a day is as 1,000 years to God, right? Adam being in paradise for 5.5 hours would be 299.1666 years. So before he was ejected from paradise and put on the earth, right? And then, interestingly, go ahead.
He had a good run. I mean, that's a decent amount
He
of
had a
time.
good run, yeah. Well, 299 years, and then whatever amount of time he lived on Earth. You know, back then, that's, you know, well, you
given that much time.
And you could, you know, almost argue that these early humans were sort of Nephilim, but in a good way versus a perverse way, you know, because they're living 1,000 years, you know, at a time. But interestingly, there's this talk of the 8th day after creation, and it's called the time of not counting, and it's 1,000 years of rest or timelessness. And it basically says that when creation comes into being, there'll be the 7,000 years of the Enochian calendar. And then after that calendar is complete, there'll be 1,000 years of rest, where it will be, what did it say? The time of not counting. I thought that was an interesting concept.
No, definitely interesting. I think what I find the most interesting is that Hod is the sphere of analytical thinking. Like it's very like Tipperith is where the science happens, but Hod is where it's like sort of described for the first time, maybe. So yeah, there is. It's like the time of not counting, because you're not looking deeper. It's very sola scriptura. You're just looking at the words as they appear on the page. You're not understanding them in any meaningful or deeper way. It's like very much like right now. It's like how people look at their phones and they see, oh, this is happening, but is it really happening?
I know.
Is it really?
Is it? You know? And that's got me questioning lately with all this UAP, UFO blow up stuff going on, just how much all of these social media, specifically Twitter, are pumping this UFO phenomenon with such incredible force. It's, you know, it's like every third to fifth post on my feed now. So it's like, what is real? What is, you know, it's all burning. It's all samsara, you know?
And you know what's interesting too? Like on Twitter, like if you don't have a paid account, you are actually limited to how much shit you see. So now if they your feed full of that stuff, it's already taking away other options if you stay on.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of will control what you're even looking at. It's a very it's a huge propaganda. I thought it was prior, but I think it's worse for propaganda now.
Oh, it's worse. It's definitely worse now. The narrative managers have like, they all have blue checks, and then you see the same ones in any sphere. Like if you're a leftist, if you're a rightist, like whatever it is, you'll see the same like 20 people, truther, whatever, like the same 20 people, the same narrative, maybe different angles, but pushed really hard. And then there'll be the people that go against the narrative, but they're also kind of leading you back in. It's very circular, very higher in a way.
Well, and it's a tuned algorithmic electronic mockingbird system that they're running, you know? So now I know, right? Back to Enoch. So basically now God tells Enoch to give these books to his children, right? And he tells Enoch that because of the wickedness and the piled lies that God will destroy the earth. So getting into piled lies, that's what we were just talking about.
Yes.
And God gives Enoch 30 days back with his family to basically tell them of the eternity and all that was spoken of until Judgment Day. And God puts a terrible angel with Enoch, who was as frost and froze his face. He says, and I thought this was an interesting little quote. He says, I saw the key holders and the guards of the gates of hell standing like great serpents, and their faces were glowing like extinguished lamps, and I saw their eyes of fire and their sharp teeth. And another quote here, and the Lord created man with his hands in the likeness of his own face. The Lord made him small and great. Whoever reviles the ruler's face hates the Lord's face. And it gets into this idea of anyone who spits on the face of man will be cut down. I don't know, a lot of later religious practices, you see people spitting on other people. And the whole idea of saliva and, you know, but he gets into the two thrones that he sits on, winter and summer solstices. Everyone from the time in the womb has a preset amount of how much he will be tried in this world. So basically getting into the ideas of predestination, like everything is fate or fata. Let's see, you know, and it has a lot of, go ahead.
I just want to say, when you said that, I thought immediately of karma. Like that's what karma is. Like but it's also like the fortune and life force. But then there's also like that thing where it seems like a contradiction, where it says like man is small and great. Right. Meaning that like in Tantra, we would understand that as, you can change it. You have the capacity if you want it. Not everybody
so
wants
choose.
It. If you so choose, right?
Right.
So it's kind of anti-Gnostic, but then there's something very Gnostic also about it.
Yep. And he says like, stretch out your hand to the poor according to your strength. Do not hide your silver in the earth. Bear every grievous and cruel yoke that comes upon you, for the Lord, and thus you will find your reward in Judgment Day. So there's all these moral kind of the 52nd and 53rd part of the book. People compare to the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus, but take away the fact that there is no savior provided, no way to save your soul, essentially. And Methuselah, when he comes back, and Methuselah, Enoch's son, offers him food, and Enoch, he rebuts him, and he says that since he received the ointment of God, that he had no food in him, nor he longs for any. And they summon all the community together, and basically he tells them of the eternity, and it says 2,000 came together, and after they heard of all the blessings, that they all basically came together to kiss Enoch for his message and bless his sons. They set up then they take Enoch up to the highest mountain, and he disappears, and they don't understand. They all rejoice. They build an altar, and his kids get all these gifts. And then it says Enoch was born on the 6th day of the month of Sivan, the first month of the year. He lived for 365 years and is taken into heaven on the 6th day of the month of Sivan, the same day and hour he was born. So basically living 365 years, we are the solar man within the system, the yearly cycle of 365 days. And then the fact that it was on the 6th of Sivan when he was born and died. Within Hebrew philosophy, 6 is the number of man. So symbolically, all these numbers are numbers of the creation of man in the physical plane.
Let me just add this, Robbie, really quick, is that you mentioned something about silver purified in a furnace of earth. That's Psalm 12. So it's silver purified, or silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. So that's obviously, if you do like a little gematria, it's like, so it's really 312, but it's like in reference to the zodiac. But then, so what does that mean? It's actually talking about Yesod, like how we talked about even before. It's talking about the rectification of all of the 7, we call them luminaries, into that one container, which is us. So it's like Adam Kadmon is us.
Right.
So really interesting, and like this is why I always say, like, the ortho bros, they do know Kabbalah actually. They just won't admit it.
Right. That's yeah. So yeah, basically he handed over 366 books to his sons. And let's see. So, but that's essentially where the short version of Enoch ends, right? And then there's a longer version, which was translated by Joseph P. Lumpkin, right? And this is where we get the story of the birth of Melchizedek, which is a fascinating subject within all my researches for myself,
Another thing you said, Robbie, that was really interesting was the idea of the mountain, and how this seems to correspond to a lot. It's like deeply universal, I would say. Like all cosmology, you have the idea of the mythical mountain, or the world island, or the world tree, or like it's just the mountain of like where it reaches to heaven. But then you also have the idea of like the mountain god. So if you could distill all gods down to one thing, like I'm talking like Zeus kind of creator level gods, or Yahweh, Baal, whatever.
Campbell, she was the goddess of the mountains.
Exactly. You always, whether they're male or female, you always have this association with the mountain and with the upward, because it's a generative. You need a generative force, so the upward pointing triangle, and then you also need the feminine force, which is the cave. So it's like so interesting. And then you could say, like, I've heard people say, okay, Jehovah is like just an angry storm god, but like all creator gods are angry storm gods.
Angry storm gods. Yeah.
It doesn't matter like what religious text you're reading, whether you read the Vedas or anything. Like Rudra is an angry storm god.
Yeah. Well, in the mountains themselves, these gods were always worshipped on these mountains, and they would basically circumambulate the mountain, to the top. Oftentimes you would find a cave at the top, for the mysteries. And it's the idea of the peak of the mountain being the closest to heaven,
Mhm.
But that's Enoch. Basically, he goes up to the top of that mountain, and that's where he is, quote unquote, translated into the heavens, without having to die, which we see with Zoroaster getting struck by the lightning on top of the mountain. We just see this continual pattern of this idea of ascension into the higher realm through the higher divine spaces, and that's why they were building the Tower of Babel. Was essentially to get up to that door back into the third heaven or Eden,
So we have this idea of like transcending the body in Tantra. I'm sure you're aware of it, Robbie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Chin, yeah, like rainbow body, clear light
Yes.
body. There's little
13th
subtle
breath.
differences, but they're pretty much all, you could say they're all similar. They're all like leaving form into true formlessness. Like you're not even, your spirit's not even contained in the world. It's like nothing. You have nothing left. So that's really interesting, and I think one other thing you said was the cave at the top of the mountain, like this peak of where the lightning comes down. But then you're also like the practitioner. So we would say in Buddhism, it's like the great guru, the adamantine guru, the adamantine sun, sometimes he's called. So like there's something Christ-like a little bit too.
Yeah. It is all just so highly intriguing. I mean, this is the stuff that I love, like digging into, because it just is the versatility that you see, and just how it brings things to light in your own mind. So now this story of the birth of Melchizedek, right? It starts out with this guy Kinnear, who is the brother of Noah, and he has his wife Sopnut or Sopnum, and she was basically old and sterile, and she couldn't give birth. She was in her last days. There was a priest that was giving a liturgy over her when she was dying, and she becomes pregnant, right? And it begins to show, and she's like ashamed, and she hid it until basically, she began to give birth. And it gets into 282 days, 9.4 30-day months. And near her husband, Noah's brother, he becomes ashamed, knowing it wasn't his. And he was trying to send her away. And she's like begging, you don't understand. I don't know how, my menopause got reversed. And she's like crying, and he's like threatening her to like beat her, right? And as he's like threatening to beat her, she just falls dead on the spot right there. And he begins to wonder if he killed her with his threats, right? And at this point, the archangel Gabriel shows up to Near and tells him that this is not his doing, and that this child is to be a righteous fruit. So Near runs to Noah, his brother, and tells him everything that happened. And Noah and Near rush back to her body and find her dead and simultaneously giving birth, right? So quickly they try to wrap her in these black garments, right? And they dig a hole, and they're coming back to get the body and put it in the hole because they want to avoid scandal. They don't want everybody talking. And when they come back to get the body, Melchizedek is basically had birthed himself from the dead body and is sitting next to his mother, and he's fully formed, like fully physically formed and already talking. and he's like praising the Lord, right? And so they basically come back and they're terrified to see this sight. And it says they have great fear. And Noah says, this is from the Lord, my brother. He says the badge of the priesthood is on his chest, and it is glorious in appearance. So this badge of priesthood is that 8-pointed star of Melchizedek. That is, and is it a birthmark? Is it, but nonetheless, this child has this 8-pointed star on his chest, and he's already like right out of the womb praising the Lord, right? So they dress this little baby in priestly garments, and they set him up on like an altar, and they feed him bread, and he's eating it. And I've seen some Oriental images of small children completely decked out in full garments. So it did give me kind of a very Eastern kind of feel.
It's interesting because I agree with you that there's iconographical sort of parallel that you can see in Latin American Christianity, Catholicism specifically. There's like a child like Nino Divino, but also there's a European version. There's Nino da Tosha, which is like Christ is like a little boy wearing like a captain's. I think he was wearing like a captain's uniform or shepherd uniform. And then, we have, so there is a very theosophical strain of Vietnamese Buddhism that really places a high emphasis on the Maitreya. So, but if you understand the Maitreya in a tantric way, it's not really a big deal. It's not like a messiah coming down from the sky and like saving you. It's just someone who will be born, who will be able to purify the words in his own way. But it's not even necessarily like a great leader or anything. It's just it's like a kind of a seed of consciousness, you could say. That could exist among different, like many people. It doesn't necessarily have to even be a singular person, but it's the idea of like the child is like kind of reborn, the seed is kind of like reborn into us, into the physical world, because we use this idea of the 3-world system, obviously. And so the third emanation is really the physical corporeal world. So any Buddha that comes into the corporeal world, they're still a human. It's not magic power time. They're people.
Right.
Something I wanted to just real
Go ahead.
quick, something, with children or, childs. You will see that depicted a lot on tarot cards for the sun. And when it comes to magical images for Tiferet, there's a child that goes along with that too.
Yeah.
Even be
And I
showing
think,
stuff.
I think that maybe the child is the revivification, is the replanting of the seed, is the rebringing of this energetic light form from the higher dimensions into the material plane, per se.
Yeah, like I think even the sun card normally has kids on it. I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Robbie.
No.
I just want to say that the child is interesting because it can be without gender. Like, child doesn't really have like a fixed gender. And I'm not saying trans. I'm saying that you don't always know like what a child is. It can go either way unless the parents dress it in like full blue or full pink. Like you don't always know.
Because of color, technically, as a child, you're dressing it in. That's how you're going to actually know what the hell it is.
Yeah.
Oh, you assume because of how we've been taught what's male and female colors.
Yeah. We were out shopping, and I was with my wife, and there was this Indian couple that had their child dressed in blue, and my wife was like, "Oh, what a beautiful little boy," and they were like, "No, it's a little girl." And they apparently in India they dress the girls in blue and the boys in pink. So, yeah.
That's a mindfuck.
And so, it again, back to cultural aspects and how we think about, as far as blue being the purity of the sky associated with the virgin force, so like we were saying, we've talked about this numerous times. There are both male and female, like energetic forces within all of these symbolic elements.
100%.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting. Like Paracelsus even says, like the only way you can really divide nature in terms of conceptual thinking is to male and female.
Right.
But it's also really only one thing. So it's like this. It's the eternal paradox of alchemy, right? Is that you can't. Is that you have to understand them in these binaries, but they're not really this really non-dual, almost you could say.
Right, right.
You know, you see
Which is,
with the Sky Goddess, and you're real quick, like Crowley. Well, I don't know about. I think he kind of associates New Wheat with that color, but like it depicted a lot. The Sky Goddess New Wheat always seems to have blue color to her too. Or
yeah,
dark.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. So now at this point, they take Sopnum and they take her out of her black garments and they wash and cleanse her body, because she's basically given birth to Melchizedek, this, this entity coming directly from, and she's born virgin. It's a virgin birth. She's inseminated from the divine kingdom. He comes out already fully formed and semi-grown and speaking. In some ways, you could argue that, again, there are Nephilim type characteristics of this entity, from the beginning. But they take her and they actually dig a grave, and with Melchizedek, they bury her. And Noah tells Ner to take care of this child in secret until the proper time comes, because all of the people of the earth will become treacherous as they begin to turn from God, being ignorant. And so that's the other thing. This is a pre-Diluvian text. So this is writing about entities, people that existed before the flood, right? So essentially, because of people becoming ignorant and turning away from the higher energetic forces, they're basically, God is going to bring his wrath down because of the lawlessness and basically flood the earth, right? So Ner, he basically hears God. Oh, he sees all the lawlessness, and he becomes very concerned, and he's praying to God. And so God comes to him in his dream and tells him that the archangel Gabriel will come down and take Melchizedek up and put him in the paradise of Edom, which is essentially related to Eden, being the Garden of Eden, so that he doesn't have to die with all the rest when the flood comes. And he says that Melchizedek will be my priest, a priest to all the holy priests. And Gabriel takes Melchizedek on his wings to Edom. And then it goes into the Noah flood story, and basically talking about a lot of the different stuff with Noah, and that's pretty much the end of the second book of Enoch, being the Slavonic secrets.
I just want to add this one thing really quick, Robbie, but I think there's something really interesting between where your work is going and like what I'm thinking about, like in my Gnostic series, is that you have the family of Noah being such a pivotal, foundational, maybe you could even say like force, like narrative force in some of these Gnostic texts as well, like the Epinoia of Norea, which is like a Aeon of the Daughter text that I've talked about on my other series. And I think it may, and also Hypothesis of the Archons, like she makes that appearance in there. Sometimes she is the daughter of Eve, and sometimes she is the daughter of Noah. So I think, yeah, there's something really interesting about that family in particular. And also interesting to note, she burned down the ark 2 times before. And so she is the third. So she's kind of the sort of the embodiment of the third cause. So I just think that's also interesting to the discussion, because it feels almost like the text is dialectical in that, or discursive, in that it's, yes, the word might be the cause, but there's a question I think that arises in the theology is like, what precedes the cause? Like with that story of the man beating his wife, like did his, not just his words, but did his negative thoughts.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what he was assuming had happened, was that his thoughts to her were so negative that he had killed her, where she stood. Yeah. And when we look further, past this point of the birth of Melchizedek, past Enoch, looking at Abraham, when he comes into Salem, or Shalom, which is peace, the city of peace, that's when Abraham gets the first communion from Melchizedek, gets the blessing of the bloodline of Judaism from Melchizedek, sets up the first covenant. It's the first time that you have the tithing of 10%. So Abraham tithes to Melchizedek 10%. And then when Abraham leaves, Melchizedek gives him all his fortune to basically establish, the new line. So there's, and then later down the road, we see that Jesus also is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And I looked into that a little bit, and it's interesting because where's it at? Oh, so we'll get into the Jesus thing in just a second. But the Jewish sages of the Mishnaic and the Talmudic times, right? Roughly from 250 BC to 625 AD. So we're talking, a good 500-year period. In the Second Temple period, they basically nickname Melchizedek as Shem. So whenever you hear the word Shem in Jewish literature, they're talking about Melchizedek, right? But the thing was, Jesus, under the Judaic line of the priesthood coming out of Aaron, Jesus was not of the line of Aaron. So he could not be a priest of the Judaic philosophy, right? And so basically, he basically says, I'm a priest of Melchizedek, which predates the line of Aaron and basically is the priest of priests. So basically, Jesus is skipping over the whole Judaic system. And basically, it said that so there's the idea that he was an Essene, right? And there's an Orthodox scholar, Hendrik Graetz, that says that Jesus could be seen as an Essene, because he did not want to create a new religion, but he was there to reform Judaism, which is why he claims the order of Melchizedek and skips over the Judaic system. So I found that interesting in the whole scheme of things.
I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting because I think a lot of religion and schisms within religion boil down to the idea of like, who is the Messiah? Like, what does he represent? And then also like, who holds the covenant with God? I think people forget that it's not so much like what different God exists or this or that, what cosmology or pantheon you use. It's really about that God exists and that who holds the covenant. I think that's a lot more interesting than like fighting about like this deity or this name or this thing. Like, there's room for all of them, but like who who can speak the words of creation, who has the right.
And maintains the laws, and like you're saying, keeps the covenant. And again through Judaism, we see them breaking the covenant and having to reestablish a new covenant. I think it happens at least 3 times that I can recall. But now back to Jesus. He was baptized by an Essene, being John the Baptist, right? And Jesus himself was a Pharisee. Who basically talked about, not only your heart, but your behavior. And then the Pharisees, like Zoroastrianism, which Enoch very much comes out of the Zoroastrian thought process. He preaches an end-day judgment as well. So there's carryover from Enoch into Judaism, into Christianity, and all of these philosophies basically encapsulating this idea of an end times coming.
I think it's interesting when you look at some of the later Christian mystic writings, which Nick has covered also, is that you have them like talking about the apocalypse, but they know that the apocalypse also just means the destruction of your perceptual knowledge.
Right.
Like how much you believe of the world is truth. So in
Right.
Buddhism, it's really easy because we have two kinds of truth,
Mm.
relative and primordial.
Right.
So it's easy for us to kind of make the distinction that most things are relative. And so yeah, when you have like an apocalypse, it's really the destruction of what you
Right.
thought you knew of the world rather than destruction of the world as it really is.
Is the revelation.
Yes, exactly. The revelation and apocalypse are hand in hand.
Hand in hand. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then one last point, Josephus, when he talked about the Essenes that were basically reformers of Judaism, right? He compared them to the Pythagoreans. And he said there was two branches of the Essenes, one that was for procreation to continue the line of the Essenes, and then another that was against procreation and only wanted to adopt children, which reminds me of the Quakers and the Shakers, because the Quakers, they would reproduce, whereas the Shakers, they specifically believed in not reproducing and bringing more souls into, material form, and they believed in adoptions. So it's interesting, just this diametric belief of bringing souls into form, and whether or not that's a sin.
Well, I find it very, I know we talked about this a lot in part one, but very Manichaean. I find like this
Yeah.
this extreme dualism, because obviously I'm anti-dualist. So I'm like, yeah, like have kids, like, like enjoy this life. I think that's what it's for. That's
Yep.
it's sort of like that's the Buddhist thinking, right? Is like you're here to live out your karma. You're here to actually work
Experience.
through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you might as well just like accept it.
Yeah.
But then yeah, you're totally right, Robbie, is that there is this idea that it can go like, and it feels very how it is like with stuff that JJ talks about, like with the sort of like neo-process stuff, like where they're very dualistic, like they're very like they're both kind of world hating. But they're world hating in two different ways. One is like
Right.
very transgressive, and the
Right.
other one is very like, let's clarify ourselves, but in like the
Yes.
weird,
Yeah. The weirder,
whatever.
the better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think what I would say is practical advice is like, don't fall into the trap of like going like so far onto either path. Just
Right.
like, yeah, I mean, you can like think through it and do whatever you want, but I think there is something more affirming to just like not maybe hate the world that we live in.
So let me tell you a vision I had, and this was a number of years ago. But I was in the water, and there was a Buddha type figure on like a big lily pad with like a 5-stringed instrument, and I was like treading water and kind of just gazing up at this personage, and he's tuning this instrument, and on the middle string, the third string, he's plucking it, and it's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter until the third string just breaks. And I just took that as a message of the middle path. It's like, walk the middle path until, it breaks. Because, to the left, you've always got the forces to the left and to the right trying to intercede and take you. And you just want to maintain the vibration of that middle path, no matter how tight it gets.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't think the middle path is easy. I think it's actually the hardest.
No, right.
But I think it's the easiest conceptual way to describe it to people.
Right.
And it's the least challenging in some ways because you don't have to be a radical ascetic. Like you don't have to go full right-hand path where you don't have any enjoyments in the world, and you don't have to go like super transgressive where you like everything is about like pleasure and like the and materialism. Like you don't go either extreme, like you really get both. So it's like, I think it's the easiest way to explain to people how to be kind of normal.
Well, and you're taking in all of it
Yeah, exactly.
while maintaining your center.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, so you get more experiential evidence or experience out of it.
Yeah, 100%.
It's
the clear path to God, if you want to think of it in a Kabbalistic way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's just challenging. It's like it's the hardest things because it's so much conceptual layers, especially Yesod and Tippereth and even in Death. It's very conceptual, right? It's like very much about your own mind. Whereas the other two paths are much more about like material formation or it's much more characteristic, right? You can sort of categorize them easier. It's much harder to do that with the middle path, Sephra. So I totally agree with you, Robby. It's how you have to look at it in the right view is what we would say in Buddhism. Like it's all about the context. It's all about the view of how you see things. And I honestly can't wait for part 3. I've honestly learned so much just doing this and seeing the connections between, especially with this Orthodox text this time as part 2. I think that it's interesting to sort of read it from a metaphysical angle, just because I can superficially sort of see how much Orthodoxy has mystical elements. Like it's very obvious to me, and I don't know that much about Eastern Orthodoxy at all. Like I don't know their theology. I can just look at icons and you can tell that there's something deeper and
much more mystical.
Yeah, it's very mystical. It's very mystical.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it's definitely, and just the fact that we get to see the birth of Melchizedek in this, because I've traced Melchizedek, through a very long process, and it's part 3 is going to be fun too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Robby and Nick. Why don't you guys plug yourself one last time, and I'll make sure to include all the links in the show notes. And thank you guys. It was awesome. Really great.
I'll go first. I'll let the star guest plug himself last. From the Occult Rejects. I mean, I'm sure most of your listeners already know who that is. You're on there. It's on all major podcasts and BitChute, Rumble, and YouTube. And thank you very much for letting me come on. And Robby, that was amazing as always. It was great story time with Robby Marx. Thank you.
It's a fun topic.
Hell yeah. It was really
and if ever anybody wants to check out my other stuff, if you want to check out my artwork or my social media, I also have the podcast, the MetaMindcast. You can check that out. Just go to my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, R Marx at Linktree. That'll pull up everything I got.
Vegeta, thanks.
For what? I should be thanking you, Kakarot.
Nah, what do you mean? I loved every minute. Goodbye, my friend.